Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sarah Panak, and I'm an Education USA advisor here at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening to our postgrad pre-departure webinar. This session is aimed specifically at students here in the UK who are headed to the US for their postgraduate studies. And in this session tonight, we're going to talk about how to make the most of your experience in the US, as well as some top tips to set yourself up for success. And we are joined by a student speaker, Yildash, who is currently completing his PhD in the US. So I don't know if Yildash, if you'd like to briefly introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sarah, for having me today. As you said, I'm a student from England, and I'm doing my PhD in the US at Loyola University, Chicago, and studying cellular and molecular physiology.
Thank you so much. At the end of the session, we are going to have an opportunity for you to ask any questions in the Q&A box. So please do hold any of your questions until the end, and we will get those questions asked then. And just to let you know, this session is being recorded, and so it will be recorded and sent out to you after the session ends. And then also be aware that there is an optional session at the end after this formal webinar part, where we will invite you to come on screen and meet other students, and you'll be welcomed along to that. So without further ado, we'll get started. Just to tell you a little bit more about myself. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from the UK. I'm originally from Chicago, where I completed both my undergraduate and postgraduate degree. So I've been living in the UK now for the past 8 years and working at Fulbright for nearly 6 years now. So really excited to be here presenting this session to you this evening. And just to tell you a little bit more about the US-UK Fulbright Commission and what we do. So we were established more than 70 years ago by a man named Senator Fulbright in the aftermath of World War II. And Senator Fulbright himself studied in the UK as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford and thought that the best way to promote peace would be to encourage cultural and educational exchange. So we're a not-for-profit organization that's jointly funded by the US and UK government to do exactly that, to promote peace and cultural understanding through educational exchange. And we do that in a couple of different ways. One way is by offering scholarships for postgraduate study and research in both the US and the UK. And we also offer an advisory service to assist students, parents, and advisors with applying for US universities. The advisory service is part of the Education USA network, which is a US Department of State network of over 400 international student advising centers throughout the world. And our aim as Education USA advisors is to offer free and unbiased advice to help UK students study in the US. And we're actually the only official source of US study here in the UK. So now I'd like to talk a little bit more about how you can plan for success at your US institution. And first and foremost, I'd like to say that on our website, fulbright.org.uk, in the Going to the US section, we have a whole pre-departure section full of pre-departure information about things like travel, academics, living arrangements, campus life, US culture. So definitely be sure to check that out after this presentation and make use of those resources. Right now, what we're going to do is focus on some things that you can do now and when you arrive on campus to set yourself up for success and to enable you to make the most of your experience in the US. So first, you're going to arrive in the US. And before you even do that, you'll be getting your visa. And just to give a quick note here on visas, we actually here at Fulbright can't give visa advice. And so if you do have any visa questions, the US Embassy in the UK is going to be the best place to go for any visa questions. That being said, we did lead a visa webinar with the consular team at the US Embassy last month. And so that the recording from that webinar is available on the pre-departure page of our website. So you can definitely go and check out that recording there, and you might find that as a useful resource when applying for your visa. But if you do have any further questions about your visa, you're going to want to reach out to the US Embassy via their website. They've got a great FAQs page on their website. They also have a contact page if none of your questions can be answered by the FAQs. The other thing to be aware of in terms of your arrival in the US is just being aware of any COVID kind of requirements that are going to be based on your individual university and where it is in the US that you're going. So just if you haven't already, I'm guessing your university has probably been in touch at this point with any COVID requirements. But if you haven't, just make sure that you check in with your university to make sure that you're complying with any of the requirements around COVID. Next, I really want to encourage you to take part in your international student orientation. Some institutions might even offer this virtually. So make sure that you're aware of when this might be. International student orientation can be a really great resource to get to know other students, to get familiar with campus and the surrounding area. They might even help you get set up with your student ID. This can also be a really good opportunity maybe to get set up with your bank account or a phone. Things like bank accounts and phone plans or SIM cards are going to be really specific to where in the US you are. So it's going to be really good to find out what the best options are for where you're located. So that's something that you can find out, at International Student Orientation from the team that works with international students, and they can kind of have some really good advice for you there. If you are going to be living in student housing, maybe some student graduate housing, you may have the chance to move into your room early if you're attending an international student orientation. And sometimes the university will even arrange trips like a local Target or Walmart, which are really big stores where you can buy things like bedding and essentials. So would definitely encourage you to take part in that. I'm also encouraging you, before you go, to do some research on what resources are available on your campus. Seek out the International Student Office and see what types of resources are going to be available from that team there. Where are they on campus? You might even want to go and introduce yourself when you get there, meet the team there, see what resources that they're going to be able to provide you while you're in the US. You might also want to look into what types of mental health resources are available at your campus, if there's any counseling services. A lot of universities will include at least a few free sessions for students if they feel like they need that, and then they can always refer outwards if student feels like they need additional support. Be aware that universities want to support their students at all levels, but whether that be undergraduate, postgraduate, and so there are a lot of services that exist. So it's often just a matter of realizing that they are there. So definitely encourage you to kind of do that research in advance and be aware of what's going to be available to you should you want to use it. Another thing that you can look at in advance is maybe connecting up with other students. Maybe there's other students from the UK who have already gone to your university or are going to be at your university, and they can give you some advice, or even just connecting up with other international students who can give really good insight of what it's like to be coming into the US from another country and things to be aware of. I'd also encourage you to get involved. I know that at the grad school level, it might not be quite the same as when you were an undergrad with your clubs and your societies at the undergraduate level, but there are a lot of graduate student organizations that do exist. And I know from speaking with a lot of you on advising calls throughout the year, or just speaking to you in general, that one of the reasons that you're interested in going to the US for your postgraduate studies is because of that chance to take part in that extracurricular life that exists in the US. And so I wonder, Yildash, if you want to share some of your experience in taking part in any graduate student organizations.
Yeah, sure. As Sarah mentioned, I did my undergraduate in the US and a master's in the UK, so I have kind of a perspective on what it's like to study both in the US and the UK. And I will say graduate school in the US is much more tight-knit, smaller communities. So some other undergraduate schools might have, hundreds of clubs and organizations, but at the graduate level, it does shrink down to very small numbers. But they're still as effective and still as fun as you would get at the undergraduate level. So personally, for me, I've been involved at our graduate student council, and our women in STEM, or minorities in STEM, is turning into more underrepresented individuals in STEM. So we are able to discuss in the graduate student council, we're able to discuss issues that pertain to graduate students, such as stipend issues and funding for conferences and how can we improve our outreach and to get more people to apply to our program and be part of our community. And then with the Women in STEM part of the club, we do outreach into the greater Chicago area and go and do fun science experiments for high school and middle school young girls who are interested in science, to kind of get them excited about science and try to kind of make them enthusiastic to pursue a career in science from a very early on age. I will also say that there's a lot of quote unofficial clubs that a lot of graduate students have. So through just meeting people through classes, you'll get to figure out each other's interests, and just naturally groups will form that do weekly common interest activities. So I know at my school they have like a weekly volleyball kind of get together where if anyone, whatever skill set that you're at, you can come and play some volleyball people. There's also like kind of groups that do soccer and football and stuff. So there's also kind of unofficial meetings that happen that graduate students kind of organize themselves quite naturally, especially in such a close-knit community as well.
Thanks. That's really useful to hear about. Thank you for sharing that. I also want to really encourage you to be open-minded with your experience in the US. Another top reason that I hear that students are interested in going for their postgraduate studies to the US is because the US offers flexibility. You might have the chance to take a class that you maybe didn't expect. You're not necessarily set to a really strict set of courses. There might be some requirements that you're taking, but you might have a little bit of flexibility in some other areas with some electives or different classes that you can take. And so do take advantage of that if that's available in what you're studying. And also be aware that classes might seem very different in the US than what you're used to from being in the UK and going to a UK university. You can typically, of course, this is going to depend completely on what it is that you're studying and what type of degree and program that you're in. But typically you're going to expect more regular testing, more regular homework, and even class participation is kind of much more expected in the US. So this is something to be aware of. And I don't know, Yildiz, if you have any personal experience that you'd like to share here.
Yeah, this was actually one of the big major points of why I chose to kind of return to the US for my PhD. In the UK, normally for most, at least in the sciences, PhDs are kind of almost like a full-time job. You're kind of in the lab full-time, versus in the US, you're actually taking classes for the first 2 years and doing research simultaneously. And as Sarah mentioned, you're not forced to just take classes within kind of like your degree. You can take classes in other fields and other departments. So I was lucky enough to take a couple of classes on ethics and bioethics, where we kind of discussed research ethics and animal use and all of the kind of controversial or polarizing topics in biomedical science research, which was really interesting and also nice to be able to argue different points of view, which is important in terms of future career aspirations if people want to go into science communication. But in terms of the classes themselves, I completely agree with Sarah that in the UK, I found that my lectures at my master's were very just that, lectures mainly. It was kind of someone coming in, lecturing us, and then leaving. And it was kind of hard to build a relationship or to get to know the professor one-on-one, even though my master's personally was kind of a smaller cohort than most. But I found the complete opposite in my PhD program. You're kind of getting lectured by the same small group of faculty members. And so you're really able to build a repertoire and a relationship with them so that you feel completely comfortable going into their office and being like, hey, like I have a question about the topic we just covered in lecture. Do you mind sitting and going through with it? And like 99.9% of the time, they'll be completely free to go through it and really make sure that you understand the concept. It also helps that in class, as Sarah mentioned, participation is a big factor. You're not sort of just lost in a crowd of people in a big auditorium. Usually my classes have been in smaller classroom seminar settings. So you're really able to kind of have discussions about the reading, have discussions about the material that were being learned, but then also get to know your classmates and not kind of be lost at the back of the auditorium, which some people might do, especially for people like us who, are traveling across halfway across the world to like go pursue an education, and so it might be intimidating. So you're kind of also thrown into being able to socialize with your classmates much easier as well.
Thank you for that. That's really useful information. I also want to encourage you to reach out for support as you need it. As I already mentioned, one of the things you might wish to do when you get to campus is to establish connections with the International Student Office. They'll be a really good resource, especially for anything kind of related to your visa. If you have any questions about visa or working, doing part-time work while you're on your visa, they can kind of answer a lot of questions related to that. Most universities typically have some type of a writing center, and so that can be available for all different levels. Some universities might even have like specific help for grad students and PhD students who are working on a dissertation. And so do not hesitate to make use of those resources if that's something that exists. As Yildiz was mentioning, the relationship with professors is such that many of them are going to be really happy to support you along the way, both in the classroom, but also at a professional level, and they'll be interested to know more about you. And so don't hesitate to kind of reach out and get extra support from them and to kind of build those professional relationships with your professors as well. And also, again, I've mentioned counseling services as well. Many universities are going to have counseling services if you find that you need to make use of any of that as well. I'd really just encourage you not to be afraid to ask for help, and to keep asking for help until you get what you are looking for. So if you are in need of something, especially at a bigger institution, it might be that there's a lot of resources, but they're kind of located in lots of different places. And so it might be that you have to try a few different places until you find what it is that you're looking for. So don't be put off if you ask a couple places and they don't have what it is. It's likely that somewhere in that institution, somebody is going to be able to help you, and it might just be a little bit of doing that research to get some help. So Yildiz, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add, anything there, either about more about establishing the relationship with professors or anything there.
Yeah, I think graduate school is really a chance, as Sarah kind of mentioned, to not only grow academically, but to grow professionally. And these professors really do want to see your growth and actually support that. And I think at the graduate school level, it becomes the kind of relationship between professor and student becomes a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more almost like colleague. Obviously, there's also, a respect level for professors who are distinguished in their field, but you begin to have more social events with professors that you might not have experienced at undergrad, especially in the UK. So there's a lot of dinners, a lot of departmental meet and greets, a lot of like kind of wine nights and stuff that the departments will hold that you can just kind of come to, and they'll have, beer and wine and cocktails and mocktails and stuff, and you can get to really build a relationship with your professor outside the classroom and really get to know them personally. And they're going to want to hear about your story as well. You're going to be very unique to be coming from the UK to the US to pursue your postgraduate studies. So they're going to want to hear from you on why you chose their school and what your interests are, because for them, that's also a way to support you further if you want to leave the US after and return home to the UK, or if you plan on staying as well. So definitely those relationships are important to foster, and it can feel a little intimidating at first, because if you're used to the more British style system where it's a very professional relationship, I would say, in the US, although it still maintains very professional, it becomes much more friendlier and much more open to bleeding in that social life within your professional and academic endeavors as well.
Thank you for sharing that experience. And going along with reaching out for support, I want to talk a little bit about your health and well-being. Again, I'm going to encourage you to seek out resources that are available as soon as you arrive on campus, so that if you find that you do need to access resources for your health and well-being, that you already know where they are, and that you're not trying to figure out where they are or what to do at a point when you're not feeling your best. Some universities might have a health center on campus, so that might be worth something looking into, seeing where that is if that's something that you can use. You're all going to have some type of health insurance, either that you purchased through the university or through separately. So I would really encourage you to read through your policy in advance and be aware of what is covered in your policy. I know that this is something that can be quite daunting and unique for students who are coming from the UK and used to the NHS. And so be sure to read through that policy, understand what's covered and what's not, and be aware that even with insurance that there are costs to healthcare. So often even just going to like a normal doctor's appointment might have something that's called a copay, where you pay a small amount of money alongside just in order to see the doctor. So that's something to be aware of. And I'd encourage you to seek out resources, not just for your physical health, but also mental health, and be aware of that. So I don't know, Yoldash, if you've got anything, tips of advice, words of advice when it comes to insurance or anything there that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think that you know, healthcare and well-being is a very hot topic right now in the US with the current kind of political climate of things, and it can be very scary coming from the UK, obviously, and having a wonderful NHS and then going to a system like the US. But I will say, for the most part, school health insurances are fairly good. You know, they're not like the best in the world, but they are fairly good at covering your basic needs. I will say to be careful of what they call in-network providers and out-of-network providers. So your health insurance will have kind of a list of local doctors and services that they're paired with that kind of offer them, I would say, a quote like a discount almost, but it's also ones that they will be ones they are 100% definitely going to pay for your services. So if you go to an in-network doctor, 100% your insurance is going to be accepted, and you know, a large portion of it will be paid by the insurance. And so when you're navigating these sort of things and you need certain types of care or certain types of specialized doctors, make sure that you check in with first of all, which insurance network you're under, and then second of all, go through their website and look at which doctors and which services are within your network to kind of minimize as much of the cost as you can. I will also say, try to avoid like A&E as much as you can. Obviously, if there is an emergency, your health comes first. So definitely, you know, if it's a life and death, you know, situation, definitely go. But I wouldn't go for simple things that could be waited on, or you could go and see, you know, like a primary care doctor, which is kind of like their GP, because those can rack up quite a lot of money. And try to also avoid ambulances if you can. Hopefully none of you will be in a situation where you need it, but these things do cost a lot of money. So just, you know, be sensible and be aware, but also your safety and your well-being does come first, obviously.
I think that's really good advice. And the other thing to be aware of is that just as you would in the UK, there are some things that you'll be able to go to a pharmacy and speak to a pharmacist about. And so if it's like, you know, you've got a sore throat or like a bit of a cold, and you're just looking for some like over-the-counter medicine, you can, just like in the UK, you can go to a pharmacy and kind of speak to a pharmacist, and that might be a really good first points of call. And if the pharmacist feels like whatever you're describing is something that definitely needs a doctor, they will tell you so, and then you can take the next steps from there too. I also want to encourage you to establish balance. When going across the ocean to another country, it is going to be really exciting. There are going to be a lot of moments of fun and adventure, but there's also going to be difficult parts as well. You're also going to be getting used to a new country, a new culture, even though technically the language is supposedly the same. Sometimes American English can be very different from British English, and you'll soon find certain words and certain phrases that somebody says, and you're like, I have no idea what you're saying to me, and vice versa, they might not know what you're saying. This is all normal, and so be ready to expect this. And know that it's totally okay to have ups and downs, and that there may be, you know, some periods of culture shock. It is typical to have kind of a honeymoon period where you get there and everything's exciting and everything's new and everything's fun, followed by some kind of dip where maybe you're feeling a bit homesick, and all you want is a proper cup of tea and a digestive biscuit, and why can't you find it? And so that's normal. And then you will find the ways to readjust. And so really encouraging you to establish balance. And that's why a lot of this presentation has been about preparing yourself to kind of make the most of your experience, to seek out resources and be aware of what's there to support you, to kind of help you establish that balance. And of course, to enjoy the adventure. You're choosing to do your postgraduate degree in the US for a variety of different reasons. You're going to be in a new place. You're going to be meeting new people. You're going to have new experiences. Depending on what your degree is, you might have teaching experiences or internship experiences or research opportunities that you've never had the chance to do, and you're really excited about that. So do take time to enjoy and even just time probably to travel and explore. So I know that Yoldash is currently in the midst of all of that fun and adventure and lots of work that's involved in that. And I have to say that I'm very envious of all of you that are about to embark on that adventure, and that I hope that you enjoy that. And so just to kind of finish up before we ask Yoldash some more questions, I just want to, again, discuss some ways that we can help. And I want to point you again to our website, Fulbright.org.uk. And you'll see in this section, going to the USA here, we've got this pre-departure section. So that's where you can go to find more kind of written information about advice on travel, housing, that kind of thing. And also that visa webinar that I mentioned before. So go ahead and check that out. If you do have any pressing questions that aren't answered tonight, that you think of after this webinar, we also do take questions by email at advising@fulbright.org.uk, or you can set up a video call to speak with one of us. So don't hesitate to reach out to us in the next few weeks before you head off to the US if you think of any other questions. And with that, I'm going to open us up to the Q&A section. I do ask that you ask any general questions that will be helpful to the whole group. And just be aware that the recording will be sent around if you do need to head off. And so I'll stop sharing, and then I will give a moment to ask questions. I wondered, Yoldash, if you could start by talking a little bit about how you feel grad school in the US differs from going to university in the UK. I know that you did your undergraduate in the US as well, but I know you did a master's degree in the UK. So I imagine you have some familiarity with university experience in the UK and can maybe speak, I know we've talked a little bit, but maybe at that academic level, even about how it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I think so. I did my master's in London, and then I'm obviously now doing my PhD in the US. And I will say, it's the academic side of things is very different in terms of, firstly, the grading and also how you're getting assessed. I think you mentioned it in the webinar that in the US, you're kind of continuously assessed throughout the semester and throughout the term. So you have assignments and tests and midterms and class participation as part of your grade. And while it's kind of a lot of constant work, it is great to be able to push yourself and to push your actual understanding. I feel like I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure a lot of people are guilty of it. But while I was doing my master's, you sort of could get away with, not concentrating at the fullest in the beginning of your kind of term, and then kind of speeding up and then ramping up and then kind of cramming as much as you can for the final exam. But I feel like in the US, you're kind of constantly learning and being assessed, that there's that work. And you're never kind of, when it gets to final season, to take your final examinations, you know where you are in terms of your grade, and more or less you're going to have that grade, if not higher, if you do significantly well in your finals for your end of semester grade. So that's been really beneficial for me, and it's kind of eased my anxiety a lot, because in my master's I felt that sometimes, I thought I understood the concept, but clearly in an exam, one day doesn't go well, you have a bad day, you have a bad week, and it kind of really affects your grades. And as we know in the UK, that one exam is such a large portion of your grade. Most of the time it's like 40, 50, 60%. Whereas in the US, I feel like that when there's been times when I've had an anxious day or when I've had, just a bad test day, which happens to all of us, it doesn't affect my grades as badly because one exam is, 15% maybe. I have 4 other exams that I can do much better on to make up that difference. So that's been really nice. I think we also touched upon the fact that it's much more like seminar based and discussion based, which I've enjoyed as well, rather than just getting lectured at for like 6 hours straight. It's been much more smaller group discussions, but also more spread out throughout the week, so that we have like an hour and a half lecture, and then there's like some time where, for me personally, I would be in the lab doing some research, and then I come back and then we'll discuss more science and stuff like that. That's been really nice because it's felt like I can actually convey my ideas and convey what I think about the topics that we're discussing to the professor and have kind of an intellectual discussion, which feels like what I would expect from a postgraduate level of education. It's not kind of, I'm just being told what I should know, but being able to extrapolate that knowledge and actually apply it to different things. So yeah, it's been like, I mean, it's been challenging, don't get me wrong. There's been days where, late night studying, kind of hair pulling, like, did I make the right decision? Like, why am I doing this? Why should I, why didn't I just stay at my job and continue working? But you kind of begin to, I think it kind of sets in after a certain amount of time where you realize that knowledge has kind of really seeped in, and you really know know what you've learned. And I think that's when you kind of appreciate how much further postgraduate study pushes you in terms of in your field than compared to your undergraduate education. So yeah, it's been really rewarding. It's been hard. It is hard work. I won't say that it's easy, but I think everyone will have a great time and will do amazingly. So
I think that's a really fair and honest assessment. And I would imagine that a lot of students that are headed to the US are kind of excited to take part in all of those things, and also aware of the work that's ahead of them, and so excited, but also probably feeling some of those feelings that you're describing right now when they think about it. Another question for you. Do you have any particular budget advice especially for students who might be kind of dependent, maybe they have an assistantship and they're dependent on a certain stipend to kind of get them through and cover their costs while they're in the US?
Yeah, I will say the US is much more expensive than the UK. So I feel like when you hear about people's salaries and people's like assistantships and stuff, they're significantly higher in the US. In the US, and that's because it kind of makes up for the cost of living. Just in terms of in the STEM field, in the biology field, the average PhD stipend in the UK is about I would say 17 to 20,000 pounds. Whereas in the US, obviously, depending on your location, it's about $25,000 to $35,000. So for a British person hearing that amount of money, that's kind of almost like at the same level as an entry-level job that you would get, or even 1 to 2 years after finishing your undergraduate study. But that money goes very quickly. Like groceries are much more expensive, traveling here, obviously like health insurance, phone bills, all of that is much more expensive. So if you are fortunate enough to have assistantships and fellowships or whatever, really don't get too excited at the beginning and blow through all your money and then have to eat like cup noodles for like a month. Really try to ground your feet for the first month or two and just kind of see how much actually living in the US in a fairly normal lifestyle is, and then base your budget off that. Personally, for me, it's I have to kind of weigh out the odds of like, not the odds, but the benefits and stuff of going out certain days. Chicago is very expensive. And so, I might not be able to afford to go out every weekend, but I can maybe do a dinner one weekend with friends at like a fairly decent restaurant. But then the next weekend it's like, okay, I'm eating at home, I'm making food at home, but I can go out for a couple of drinks with friends. So it's kind of about compromise and give and take. I will say things do add up quickly. So as I said, grocery bills are usually much higher than the UK. Like phone bills and stuff like that are much higher. So personally for me, I took the first 2-3 months to really see how I can stretch out I'm fortunate enough to get a monthly stipend, so I really use the first 2-ish months to see how I can stretch out my stipend and see which areas that I can afford to spend money on and which areas I simply need to cut back on. So yeah, I would say don't get carried away with the big numbers that you might see. So if you're, it's not as it's not as much money as you think it is. It kind of goes very quickly. And in terms of budgeting, like depending on the length of your program, obviously everyone's going to be going home at different times and a different amount of times. Or some people don't even go home at all if they're only in a 1 to 2 year program. But I would say try to book your tickets as soon as possible, or like as far in advance as possible. Your graduate schools are usually really good about having an academic calendar for the entire year. So, and if you can't find it, just ask them. Just say, hey, and ask your professors. They're gonna be the ones writing your exams. So just say, hey, when's the last day that you expect, to give us the final exam, and plan your kind of vacation around that. So that you can get the kind of the best deals on flights home, stuff like that. So yeah, I would say budgeting is a tough one. I think it's going to vary as well depending on where you live. For example, like if your stipend is $30,000, 30,000 in New York is completely nothing. That will go so quickly, but $30,000 in Ohio or in North Carolina or South Carolina, you can really stretch that out. So it also depends on location as well, which is varied a lot.
That's really useful information. And would you mind me asking, in terms of your stipend, it sounds like it's like an assistantship. So is there anything, like what do you do in exchange for the stipend that you receive? Do you do research? Do you do any teaching? What are the, kind of measures, or the terms rather?
Yeah, so it varies from school to school. So for my stipend specifically, I'm expected to use 100% of any time I'm not in class doing research. So that's how they kind of justify giving me my stipend, also paying for a large portion of my tuition fees, that I'm conducting research for the university and for my professor, and giving back in that sort of sense, that I'm generating data which will get published and bring the university more prestige, I guess. So that's how they justify mine. I know different stipends have different conditions. So a lot of other PhD programs will have assistantships and teaching. So you have to teach, you have to be a teaching assistant for, generally it's an undergraduate course for like 1 or 2 for the first couple years. And that is usually in STEM, it's usually running like a lab section for like cell biology, intro to chemistry. For other more social science classes, it might be running small group discussions or like problem sessions or reading discussions and stuff like that. At the PhD level, I will say, I think, again, varies on your school and varies on your department. Your stipend usually the first 2 years is provided, 2-ish, 2.5 years is provided by your graduate school. And then after your 2.5 years, for the remainder of your PhD, that is funded by your professor that you are doing research or conducting your thesis under. So they'll likely have some sort of funding, some sort of grant that they'll pay you through. And then they'll also help you apply to fellowships and grants, which will not only take the burden from their kind of resources and their funding, so they can commit that money to more research. So if you have your own fellowship, you're kind of paying yourself, but at the same time, it looks really good on your CV or on your resume. It looks really well to kind of have those fellowships and have those scholarships underneath your name, so that if you want to pursue further like higher education and go into academia, it looks really beneficial. So there's different funding options. You're never, particularly in a PhD, I will say, you're never left, like they're not going to kick you out because they don't have funding. The kind of promise is that as long as you're in good academic and social standing with the school, like you're not in trouble or anything, you're guaranteed funding for your 5 to 6 years. I know master's works a little differently. So that kind of depends on also your program and scholarships and whatnot. I will say that I would avoid at all costs, like as much as you can, to take out loans in the US as an international. There's 1 or 2 companies that do give loans for tuition and stuff if you really need it. you know, everyone's financial situation is different. I will try to avoid it as best you can because they come with huge interest rates that can really build up. So try to, I would say, live within your means and live within, you know, your assistantship and your scholarship and stuff like that.
That actually leads really well into this follow-up question, which I think is going to depend on what institution you're at. And so I'm not sure of your experience, but have you found that once you're on campus that you're able to find access to any additional funding resources that maybe you aren't aware of before you get on campus or aren't available to you until you're a student on campus? Like once you're on campus, are there any kind of additional funding resources that students should look out for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, if you're a master's student, you know, you're going to be, your visa doesn't allow you to work anywhere else, but it does allow you to work on campus. So there'll be a lot of campus jobs for graduate students that you'll be able to make an extra income from and use that income, you know, to do whatever you want. But there's also going to be grants and like almost like scholarships and awards that your schools are going to do. So if you want to go to a conference based on your project or based on, you know, your research, most schools will have kind of a conference budget that you're allowed to access. So they'll help you pay for travel and hotel and like food and even entertainment if you're going to go off to a conference and represent the school. Even if you're presenting or not presenting, like your department will justify it and will financially support you on that. There's also more recently, there's been like COVID relief packages that they've had. Some schools are continuing on it. So for the people that are listening, if they're going to graduate school like fairly soon, you know, like this year, those packages might continue and some schools are giving out funding through that as well. And then for me personally, so my program, how it's set up is you do a bunch of different lab rotations and then you commit to a lab after your first semester of your first year. And once I committed to a lab, my professor was able to kind of very candidly ask me, like, do I have enough technology? So do I have a laptop? Do I have all the necessary technology that I need to do research? And, you know, luckily my laptop, I had just gotten it when I started my master's only 3-4 years ago. So it's still running okay. But I had friends in the program that their laptop was dying, and those professors are able to buy a laptop for the students. And it depends on how long you're there for. I think for master's students, it's kind of expected that you give that back usually. But for PhD students, because you're there for such a long time, it's kind of like it's going to be yours at the end of it, because by the end of it, it's going to kind of be full of your data and full of like everything you have. They're not going to want that back. So those options are there as well. That's kind of not in a student handbook, but you know, all professors usually do offer their students, hey, like, do you have a laptop? Like, can I get you one? And then my desk, my office, like on my desk at school, has like monitors and like any stationery I need and stuff like that. So there's always, it might not be like a direct check into your account money, but there's always other ways that your school will support and help you into making sure that you can, you know, get your education and not fall behind on those sort of things. I will also say tax returns is a blessing sometimes. So this, I think it's usually your first year isn't the best, but after that, your tax returns do get real nice in the summer. So you can, you know, get a couple $100 back in the summer. I had a friend one time that even got like $1,000 back. So those can be nice little, like almost like a self bonus in the summertime. So yeah, there's different ways. And again, most schools will have their own funding as well. Like I know my undergraduate specifically had a loan program, so you could loan books from them and you can loan different materials. So just check in with your school's resources, check in with the library. Those are going to be huge resources. They might even have a loaner like iPad and stuff that you can borrow. So but yeah, definitely loads of options out there.
That's really good advice. Thank you. I think will be really reassuring to anybody who might be looking for some extra funding once they get to campus. So I think that those are all of the main questions for now. I wanted to check with you to see if there's anything that we haven't asked that we wish we had, and if you have any kind of last bit of wisdom you'd like to impart. And it's okay if not, but I just wanted to check just in case.
I will say the one thing I learned from my undergraduate, if you're planning to go back home, and even if you're not, I would say this is a good option, is to keep your British bank account open and to maybe with, you know, if you have a partner back home, if you have a family member or a friend, just keep it open by like getting a friend to transfer you like literally £5 a month, and then you send it back right back to them. But just keeping that account open and keeping it active really allows your credit score to keep at a high, whatever level you have it at, but it doesn't allow it to drop. But also it allows you to pursue like other things when you come back home, so you're not kind of seen as you just disappeared for 2, 5, 6 years. That was really helpful for me personally, because I kept my bank account open at undergrad, and then when I was doing my master's, it was much easier to talk to banks about loans and stuff like that. So especially for if you're if you're a little bit older, maybe like in the future think about buying a house when you get back to UK and stuff like that, it can really help you for your case if your bank account is kind of left open and running. So yeah, I would say that's one of the things that most people don't think about, that I had to kind of learn, and it was kind of a happy accident that I did. But definitely one like that. And two, I would say just be prepared to I would say America is lots of different countries welded together. Like, it is called the United States, and I would say every state is almost like its own country. So I would say if you have the opportunity, don't get complacent and stay in your state. Try to explore the neighboring states. They'll be like, even if on the same coast, they can be wildly different. And the US is, if you're into nature and if you're into outdoors, it's so beautiful. There's like beautiful mountains, and there's mountains on one side of the country, and then there's like forests on the other, and then like beautiful beaches on the other. So there's so much to explore. And if you're like me that loves to travel, like, take advantage of that. If you're already on this side of the globe, take advantage of the fact that you're so close to South America compared to being like at home. You're so close to Canada and Mexico and the Caribbean. So try to travel as much as you can. Obviously, take your education first, but travel is a big plus here. Like, it's a little expensive, but if as much as you can do it, try to do it.
That's really good advice, I think. I just want to say a massive thank you to you taking your time today to come and speak and answer all of these questions, especially because I know that you are very busy with your PhD program. And it is also summer in Chicago, which is a lovely time to be out and about enjoying Chicago. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And I want to remind everybody that the session is being recorded. It will be put up on our YouTube channel and will be sent out to all of you. And thank you for tuning in tonight. What I'm going to do now is I'll end the recording, and then I will talk about the section that is going to happen next. So thank you all that have been tuning in, and I hope that you have a lovely evening.